Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tea Time History Chat Live with me, Philippa Lacey-Brule. I hope you are all well and welcome. Thank you for joining me live. If you're joining me on YouTube or no, I'm not Instagram today. I'm just YouTube and Facebook. Also, a warm welcome to you if you are on the catch up or you are listening later on the podcast. Whichever way you join me, I am grateful for it. So today we're going to talk about the casket letters. I can't actually remember how or why I picked this topic. However, this is what we're going to do. So I'm going to get myself a little bit sorted. And first of all, I want to say a thank you to. So normally I do absolutely everything on my own. The research, the script writing, obviously the presenting, everything that comes afterwards with post-production. And but this week I've had some help from my son Isaac. So I want to say a big shout out and a thank you to him for helping me out with his research into the casket letters, which I will go into as the main topic of today. Thank you. I can see people joining. I hope you're all well. Katie, actually off on a Wednesday, so able to tune in live. Welcome. I can see Deborah and Dana, Deborah, Heidi, Amanda. Welcome. Like I say, I'm streaming live on YouTube and Facebook. You can support me if you like with stars on Facebook, with super chats on YouTube. But as usual, as I say, the best way, the way I love for you to support me, if you would like to, is by joining my Patreon, because I can give you loads back. It's patreon.com/British history. That is me on Patreon. And I want to give a shout out, please, to my new patrons, my newest patrons, Alison, Lee, Zach, and Paul. We've got some men in there, which is great. Debbie, you finally made a live as well. Hi, welcome. How are you? For patrons this week, I may have mentioned this before. I have a talk series, the Tour Talks series, going live in Patreon, and they are the talks which happened on the tours, hence being called the Tours Talks series. I know, snazzy, right? There have been 2 talks released so far into Patreon, both the talks from Kate McCaffrey surrounding Anne Boleyn's Books of Hours and her incredible research into them and what they tell us. And latest one to be released is James Clark's talk on Anne's religion, Henry's Reformation. And without even knowing it, James drops in revelations because he's not a Tudor historian as such. He's a historian of sort of the later medieval period, but around religion and the Reformation. He just drops in some really interesting things about Anne and Henry, that especially Anne, that we didn't. Oh yeah, even Gareth Russell was didn't know. So they're amazing. So it's well worth having a watch of that talk if you're in my Patreon. And if you're not, of course, you can join at patreon.com/British history. For everyone, though, I have now got available Sharon Bennett Connolly's interview with me on the women of the anarchy. So the interview surrounds the stories of the 2 Matildas, Empress Matilda and Queen Matilda, who were key players, if not the key players, in the anarchy, the period after Henry II dies and his nephew Stephen takes over as king in front of Henry II's legitimate child, Matilda, Empress Matilda. So that is already available on YouTube and on the podcast. Again, if you want the extended interview where I ask Sharon questions which my patrons put forward, then you can get that over on Patreon, patreon.com/British history. Before I get started, I will let you know I am going to be away for the next 2 weeks. I am heading to a place with a lot of history, but I'm supposed to be going there to relax. I am heading off to Cyprus for so yes for a week. So I won't be here for the next 2 Wednesdays. When I am back, though, I will be putting together the questions for my next guest, who is Alice Hunt, Professor Alice Hunt, who has a forthcoming book, an upcoming book on the Republic, so the time where England, Scotland, and Ireland, by virtue of the English killing the king, didn't have a king, and what happened. And it's a book, and it actually takes you through year by year. It's not out yet. I've had an advanced reader copy, which I'm very grateful for, and I will be interviewing Alice. If you want to put any questions to her about the Republican period, she writes from the 1649 to 1660, then please, again, look out for the post in Patreon. If you're not already in there, come over and join us. We're a happy crew. We get loads of fun stuff. I was at Burghley House this week, Monday, and I posted some pictures which I took and some information about Burghley House into my Patreon. So that's also in there if you go over there. We've also got book club on the 7th of July, Elfrida by Elizabeth Norton, actually about the English Queen Elfrith, who's supposedly the first crown queen in England. So it's a small book, but it's everyone's finding it's tough going because England is such a different so yeah, shout out Isaac, thank you, Manda. Such a different landscape, literally, but also in terms of there is no united England, so we're talking about different kingdoms within what we know as England. And then you imagine they've all got a king, they've all got heirs, there's a lot of people, and then put into the mix that all the names are old English names that we're not so used to. So it's a great book. I'm really looking forward. Well, it's a great topic, and the book. Well, we're going to be discussing it in book club, but I think it's going to be a really interesting discussion on a really interesting book. Laurie says, really enjoyed the talk with Sharon. The anarchy period is so intriguing. Yes, it is. Thank you, Laurie. So obviously, if you are not a patron, that's absolutely fine. You can find the interview with Sharon on YouTube, and I've put actually a link to it in the show notes underneath this episode, because I was rather organized this morning. Yeah, Diane, so many names that sound the same. Yes, well, I suppose because a lot of the roots of them are the same as well. And very helpfully, one of the book club members, one of my patrons, Lucy, has put together not only sort of a list of the kings and where they are and where they come in the time frame, but also a map, which has been very, very useful. So the main topic for today is, like I said, the casket letters. So the casket letters, to put them into context, are letters that were supposedly written by Mary, Queen of Scots, to her third husband, the Earl of Bothwell. But I'm going to take you back, because I said casket letters, but actually this is within the context of did Mary, Queen of Scots, plot to kill her husband? Because the casket letters were produced as evidence at a hearing into that question. So which husband? Her second husband. Mary, Queen of Scots, was as a child, and we're not going into this today, but married to the Dauphin of France, who became Francis II, but died shortly sort of after. And Mary returned to Scotland, a land which she hadn't been in since she was a small child. She returns to Scotland and isn't particularly welcome there. She's a Catholic queen, and Scotland have gone through a reformation, and they are well, they're being the regent following the death of her own mother, Mary of Guise, who was her regent while she was away in France. But Mary of Guise has died, and her half brother, the illegitimate son of her father James V, the Earl of Moray, is it's acting regent. So he's not too keen on her coming back either. So she's finding herself with few friends in Scotland. Her cousin, Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, was, though, different. He was very charming and he was a friendly face at a court full of hostiles to Mary. And the couple, well, they became a couple and they married on the 29th of July, 1565. Now, I said cousins. Both were descendants of Mary Tudor, the eldest daughter of Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. So, therefore, both descendants of Henry Tudor. So, why don't I show you the family tree? I put this together especially so that I can demonstrate to you how they are related. So, apologies to those of you on the podcast, but I will talk through it. First of all, I'm having a drink. So, Henry VII's eldest daughter, Margaret, goes to Scotland and marry James IV of Scotland. You might remember, if you've ever heard anything about Margaret Beaufort, that this is the marriage she tries, and Elizabeth York, they try and delay it so that Margaret doesn't go up to Scotland before, while she's too young. Probably based on Margaret Beaufort's own experience of being married as a 13-year-old. Yes, the family tree is a wreath. As you can see, it actually is. So Henry VII, so his daughter goes up and marries James IV of Scotland, and they have a son who becomes James V of Scotland. He marries the French Mary of Guise, and their daughter is Mary, Queen of Scots. Right. But James IV dies, actually, at the hands of the English, and she remarries a man. She marries a man called Archibald Douglas, who's the 6th Earl of Angus, and they have a daughter called Margaret Douglas. Margaret Douglas was born actually in the north of England, spends most of her time in England. But she marries Matthew Stuart, the 4th Earl of Lennox, and their son, one of their sons, is Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley. Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, marries Mary, Queen of Scots. So they are closely related. And they have a son who's called James, who becomes James VI of Scotland and the 1st of England. So that will all come back in. That initial charm, that friendly face that Darnley provided for Mary at the Scottish court was about his only positive attribute. Darnley was, putting up some pictures of them. Here's Henry Lord Darnley on the right, looking very lovely and angelic. Mary in the middle, and then Henry Lord Darnley is Mary's second husband, obviously after Francis II of France, and her third husband was James Hepburn, Earl of Bothwell. So they're all there on the slide together. But Henry Lord Darnley, despite his angelic looks there, he was lazy, arrogant, entitled, jealous, very jealous, he was prone to violence. He was sexually deviant and desperate for power and status, but lacked capabilities to do it, lacked the discipline to be of any use. And so the marriage, you can guess, was a disaster. Whatever Mary saw in Darnley at the beginning very soon disappeared. There's an English ambassador to Mary's court, Thomas Randolph, and he reported back to Robert Dudley, of course, in Elizabeth I's court in England. I know for certain that this queen repenteth her marriage, that she hateth him and all his kin, And that same ambassador also reported that there were plots by Darnley to take the throne, or at least control of it, from Mary. Yeah, sexually deviant. So we could go into it all. He wasn't faithful. He would sleep with anything that moved. He suffered from syphilis, famously. Yeah, he not the kind of man you would like to be married to, because it didn't stop once he was married. And his jealousy, and this compulsion to violence, but this jealousy was something that was easily preyed upon by Mary's opponents at court. Manda, yes, he was bisexual as well. I don't think it matters who you're sleeping with. If it's not your spouse, then there's an issue. So he's easily preyed upon by Mary's opponent at court. They can prick this jealousy trait in him easily, and this it's very short, long story short, but it spills over into the horrendous murder of Mary's private secretary, Turin-born David Rizzio, at the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh. Rizzio was initially a museum. He wasn't a museum. He was a musician, which is not the same thing. He came over with I think it was the Duke of Savoy's court. Can't remember. He came over with a foreign dignitary's court, Duke's court, and he stayed, and was a friend of Mary. He's a friend of Darnley's as well, actually, and rose up in the ranks and became very quickly Mary's private secretary. It's not ever going to do you well to do that. You're going to make enemies. But on the 9th of March 1566, Mary, who's 7 months pregnant by this point with her husband Henry Lord Darnley's child, was dining in a private antechamber off her bedroom at the palace. I've actually been there, but it's so long ago that I couldn't find the photograph, I'm afraid. It's quite a small room where they were eating. Around supposedly 80 men, led by Darnley, flooded into her bedchamber. They can't have flooded into this tiny room. I promise you couldn't get more people in that room than was probably dining in there. Plus, Darnley goes in there, one of his accomplices, and they demand that Rizzio go with them. But he hides behind Mary. A pistol is held to Mary's belly, so she's powerless to do anything physically. I mean, she's 7 months pregnant as well, although she's known to be a very, very physically fit and able person. But there's little she can do other than protest. But Rizzio is stabbed while he's still hanging onto her skirts. He's dragged out, and they continue to stab him. I hope you're not eating your breakfast, sorry, or lunch. I apologize if you are. Mary, according to Mary, he sustains 56 stab wounds. I'm not actually sure how she counted that, how she would know that, but it seems a very specific number. And the dagger that was left in Rizzio's body was Darnley's own dagger, although he didn't leave it in the body. It was left clearly to make sure that Darnley could not deny any involvement. Pamela makes a good point. Darnley clearly had no regard for his child. Interesting, as he could have actually had some power through his child. Yeah. So putting Mary in this situation at 7 months pregnant, I would be surprised if people didn't know that kind of stress would lead to miscarriages, potentially. So I think he was so it does talk to his mental capacity, because of course, if you remember, so he has he's basically the other people involved are not Mary's fans. They're her enemies. They don't care if her child dies, because they don't want her to have power at all. And um, so it was, um, you know, yeah. So he's dragged along with it because he's so easily led. It appears. Mary is kept under guard, but she manages to arrange to see Darnley by herself and seduces him into escaping with her. They escape to the home of the sister of the Earl of Bothwell, James Hepburn, who will come back into our story in a moment. They amass an army and march back to Edinburgh on the 18th of March, she moves back into the castle to prepare for the birth of her baby. And James was born there on the 19th of June, 1566. Mary, though, has far from forgiven Darnley and begins to look for support and help in the troubles against her husband. Elizabeth I in England, by the way, becomes very aware of Darnley's behaviour, and she's quite outraged after Rizzio's murder that Mary could be subjected to this horror and have no capacity, that her authority is ignored. And there's entire books written on what happens next. She seems to have some involvement in plans, in thoughts for Darnley to be taught a lesson, and then it's conjecture as to whether, or opinion, is she thinking that he's just going to get roughed up, basically, fall into line, you're out of order, kind of roughing up. However, so she's talking to this with people, including the Earl of Bothwell, but it goes way beyond a roughing up. And Darnley is actually murdered in the early hours of the 10th of February, 1567. He's staying at a house called Kirkfield in Edinburgh. It's actually it was a former abbey. He'd come back to Edinburgh, persuaded by Mary to come back to Edinburgh. He had received treatment for syphilis in Edinburgh I've got the date here. Oh, well, in January 1567. Sorry, in Glasgow, he'd been there for treatment for syphilis. January 1567, and he comes back to Edinburgh to recuperate on the encouragement of Mary. She actually visits him. They've been estranged, but she visits him on the night before he's found dead. I'm not actually sure if that's earlier on the 10th, or no, it would have been on the 9th. Anyway, she goes there the night before, which is slightly unusual, or very unusual, because they're estranged. And the house is blown up by gunpowder, but that isn't how he dies. It seems like the house was blown up was planned to be blown up in order to cover up for the murder of Darnley, which should have already happened. However, Darnley becomes aware that there's something going on, and he escapes into the garden below, the orchard, with a servant, where his murderer catches up with him, and they are both killed by smothering or asphyxiation in the orchard. But then the house blows, but they're in the garden. So clearly that's not how they were killed. And here on the side, in the top right-hand corner, this is a pictorial representation of Darnley's murder, where he was found, and then his burial. This, I believe, and I haven't had a chance to look it up, so this is from memory, but this was made and was in the possession of Elizabeth I's Chief Minister, William Cecil, who, by the way, built Burghley House, which I was at the other day, which patrons have been able to see photographs of. So, It all links in, doesn't it? Um, Now, I've mentioned the Earl of Bothwell was one of these people who Mary had been talking to about what can they do about Darnley, and he is the main suspect in the murder of Darnley. So Bothwell is the main suspect in the murder of Darnley. And there's a trial in 1567, sorry, excuse me, in April 1567, so straight after, but he's acquitted. But nobody's satisfied other than Mary. I don't think that he's acquitted. On the 24th of April, while Mary, so after the trial's earlier on in April, while Mary's on the road to Linlithgow Palace, from Linlithgow Palace to Edinburgh, Bothwell appears with 800 men. He says, there's danger in Edinburgh. You can't go to Edinburgh. And he proposes that he takes her to his castle at Dunbar and he will keep her out of harm's way. She agrees to accompany him and they arrive at Dunbar something like midnight. Then the story is that Bothwell basically takes Mary prisoner and rapes her, and by that way secures her for himself and secures their marriage. She's free to marry because her husband's died. He's not actually free to marry, and I will come back to that. He is still married when he takes Mary prisoner. So anyway, I'll come back to that. But Mary marries Bothwell on the 15th of May, 1567 at Holyrood, either in the Abbey or in the Palace Chapel, I'm not sure. This sparks a civil war in Scotland. Mary has made a huge error. It's a very strange decision, would be saying it mildly. She marries the chief suspect of the murder of her second husband, who no one likes, but you don't get to murder them, or you don't get to marry the guy who is accused of murdering him. So Mary's made this huge error in marrying Bothwell, and is one thing. Her other error, which again is a catastrophic one, is not making a show of finding her husband's killers. As the husband to the Queen, he was considered a king. So there's been an acquittal and there's no real further efforts to find who has murdered the quote unquote king. So Mary is criticised heavily for that. So she hasn't gone after her late husband's killers, the king's killers, and then she's gone and married the chief suspect, who has been acquitted, but nobody believes that he's innocent. Elizabeth I herself, down in England, or despite the fact that she knew of Darnley's bad behaviour, she was, like I said before, outraged at it. She could not tolerate that non-pursuance of the killers, and that would have far-reaching consequences for their relationship, the relationship between Elizabeth and Mary, really from that point on. Scotland, like I say, goes into basically civil war. They consider their queen dishonoured. She looks like she's an adulteress, a murderess. Stories are that she's driven by lust, because why else would you marry the killer of your previous husband? There is a meeting of the troops. It doesn't spill over into a battle, because Mary's troops sort of dissipate before any fighting could be done. That's at Carberry Hill. Bothwell is given safe passage from the field, and he flees to the continent. I've got a video about what happens to him on my channel somewhere as well. It wasn't a good move for him. He couldn't have stayed, but he didn't make a good choice where he went either. So So Bothwell is he flees to the continent. Mary is taken to captivity, and she's kept at a place called Lochleven Castle, and it is a castle on an island in the middle of a loch, which is a lake. It's remote. She is, although we don't know if anyone realizes this at the time, but she is also pregnant. And sometime between the 20th and 23rd of July, Mary suffers a miscarriage, and she miscarries twins. On the 24th of July, we're in 1567 still, she's forced to abdicate her throne in favour of her infant son, James, and her half brother, Lord Moray, becomes regent in that case. Mary manages to escape Lochleven, which is incredible, really, that she scales down a wall. She's had a miscarriage. She scales down a wall. She gets on a boat. She rides. I mean, she must have been physically a very impressive person. She, excuse me a second. The only person that can get through on my do not disturb is my daughter, and it's the only time of the week she rings me. So anyway, so Mary goes. Mary is. Sorry, excuse me. Mary manages to escape. She escapes to England, and she goes to Carlisle Castle and Elizabeth's council. Basically, William Cecil, who's not a fan of Mary Queen of Scots by any way, shape, or form, is basically makes sure that she's under house arrest there. Effectively, that begins Mary's incarceration. 19 years worth of incarceration, which of course ends in Mary's own execution at Fotheringay Castle in 1687, the year before the Spanish Armada. And so Mary's in England. She thinks she comes to England and Elizabeth will support her claim. Well, will support her to go back to Scotland and get back on the throne there. Mary also has this succession obsession about being named Elizabeth's successor in England for the English throne. Now, Elizabeth is very, very wary of Mary. Not only is she's supposed to be physically uh, um, uh, physically impressive, she's in many parts of Europe, the Catholic Europe, she is considered the actual, bloodline that should be on the English throne. Elizabeth's Elizabeth's parents' marriage not being considered not being considered valid by Catholic Europe. So she's in England. Effectively, she's now incarcerated. She's now a prisoner of Elizabeth I of England. Elizabeth orders. Remember, Elizabeth is also kin of Darnley. She orders a commission to look into Darnley's murder and the accusations against Mary that she conspired with Bothwell to murder Darnley. That was held in York at the King's House, which is the photograph on the left-hand side of this slide. I took that when I was up in York, and any of you who are coming on the Catherine Howard tour, we will be we'll be walking past that building, so you'll be all the details on the outside. You'll be able to see that house also plays very much in the Catherine Howard story, which Gareth Russell will tell us about when we're there. So this commission is set up in York. It opens in October 1568. Elizabeth forbids Mary's attendance, but Mary is refusing to accept the jurisdiction of the court anyway, so she's not going to go. This is at the point where the casket letters are presented. And there's a photograph down on the bottom right-hand side of the actual casket. They're named the casket letters because they were in a casket. Yeah. It's a silver gilt casket. It's about a foot in length, about 30 centimeters. It's very ornate. It's very beautiful. And this photograph here is from the National Museum Scotland, who have this casket on display. But anyway, so her half brother, the Earl of Moray, and her enemy, we know, presents these letters by way of evidence against Mary. There are 8 unsigned letters, supposedly from Mary to Bothwell, 2 marriage contracts, and some sonnets or love poems. They're unsigned. Mary denies that she's written them and maintains that they're forgeries. The head of the commission, Thomas Howard, 4th Duke of Norfolk, reports to Elizabeth that if these letters are actually genuine, they may well prove Mary's guilt. Yes, by the way, that is the same Norfolk that also conspires to marry Mary later on. Mm. The letters were shown to the this commission opens in October 1568, I think, and the letters apparently had been shown to the Scottish Privy Council in December 1567, but were not shown publicly before the hearing in York the following year. And the fact that they hadn't been produced in public, I mean, by public, it's not like for the general public, but produced by way of maybe supporting the imprisonment of Mary and Mary's forced abdication, has led some historians to, like Alison Weir, to speculate that actually they were forgeries because they weren't produced because they didn't exist, and therefore they weren't in the possession of Moray since the aftermath of Carberry, which is what he claimed, but in fact are being produced in the interim period, even for the York Commission, perhaps. But other historians, people like Jenny Wormald, Wormald has offered an alternative explanation, believing that the reason they weren't produced was for the simple fact that they were so incriminating, and that is the same reason that they were later destroyed by Mary's son James in 1584. So those are the casket letters. It's still up for debate whether they were real, whether they were forgeries. The conclusion of the inquiry would not tell us either way. Despite many of the commissioners believing that they were genuine, the verdict was returned that it couldn't be proven either way, which is exactly how Elizabeth I had directed the verdict to go. She therefore managed to keep the Protestant Scottish Privy Council on side. She also managed to keep Mary, her greatest rival and threat, in custody in England. So it was actually it was a bit of a win for Elizabeth. Now, I want to add into the mix here, and I think I have covered it before, but it's something I'm going to cover again, and it's an article by Leslie Smith, who some of you will know from interviews I've done with her. You may know her from, in fact, if you're watching, you can see her face on my bookshelf there. That's Leslie dressed as Elizabeth I. But if you've been on tour with me up to Tutbury Castle or Harvington Hall, you have also seen Leslie. And but she is, well, what the time she wrote this article, she was doing her PhD in the history of medicine. I believe she has that now. And her article is called Mary Queen of Scots, the Daughter of Debate, and it's in the it's a history of it's an article on history of contraception in the Family Planning Reproduction Healthcare Journal. So you might say, interesting. And so, sorry, I'm not looking at comments, by the way. I can see someone's having an argument, but I'm sorry, I'm not taking any notice. And anyway, so she writes about so she goes through these events of Mary's of Darnley's murder, Mary's capture, Mary's miscarriage, and her escape. And the reason she does that is she's questioning the timings of Mary's pregnancy. So this pregnancy that she has uh, she's pregnant when she is captured after Carberry Hill, when she is incarcerated in Loch Leven, and she's miscarried just before she's made to abdicate in favour of her son James. Um, and and it's important because this is what the casket letters are trying to prove in one way, that Mary is implicated in the murder of her husband, of her second husband, Darnley. And of course, she marries Bothwell very quickly after he's acquitted of Darnley's murder. And the story from both of them is that she has been raped by him, and he. So let me pick out some of the main points. So he takes her um, to his castle at Dunbar. She's there for 10 days, and he travels back to Edinburgh to secure his divorce. So he actually leaves her for quite significant amount of time during that 10-day period, and yet there is no record of an attempt to escape, which um, Mary's escaped, or she's done quite a bit of sort of physical escape. Um, uh, I know the Loch Leven one is to come, but she's it's almost out of character that she hasn't managed to even attempt to escape, or it's not written down that she does anyway. And so the timescales basically go that in January 1567, Darnley is treated for syphilis in Glasgow. On the 10th of February 1567, he is found dead at Kirkfield. 24th of February, Mary visits her son for the last time at Stirling. 50 and is abducted on her way back to Edinburgh. That's the Bothwell abduction. 15th of May, Mary marries Bothwell at Holyrood. The 24th of July, she miscarries the twins. And the documentary source for the miscarriage of the twins is one of Mary's close advisors, Claude Now. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. It's Nau. Although he's not in Mary's party at Loch Leven, he publishes, or his papers are published posthumously. They're called The History of Mary Stuart, and they were published in Edinburgh in 1883. And he records that the event is happening on the 24th day of July 1567 as an avortement de deux enfants. There's no mention of a midwife being present. It is possible that nobody even knows she's pregnant. Sir Nicholas Throckmorton, who is one of Elizabeth I's ambassadors, he does go to Mary Queen of Scots, Mary Stuart at same person at Loch Leven. And he writes saying that Mary has refused to divorce Bothwell. So this is before. So his letter is dated the 18th of July. She miscarries on the 24th. So this is before her. This is before the miscarriage. Nicholas Throckmorton has seen Mary, and he reports to William Cecil that she is refusing to divorce Bothwell. She would, in quotes, but rather die, grounding herself upon this reason, taking herself to be 7 weeks gone with child. By renouncing Bothwell, of course, she would acknowledge herself as an adulteress, and be with a bastard child, forfeited her honour, etc., etc. So the other things to think about are the conditions that she's in. And Leslie herself has visited the room that Mary miscarried in. She says the light is incredibly poor. They've got no modern medical equipment, no, nothing. I was going to say magnifying glasses, but that's not what I mean. What do I mean? You know what I mean. Good God. I did quite a bit of science at A-level, never mind. So the lighting's poor. She's possibly not got anyone of any experience with her when she miscarries, which is frightening. And so Leslie poses the question. We should ask, how experienced were the midwives or doctors in identifying twins in a fetal state, and at what point, if they even were midwives and doctors. Um, there's things like the fact that she sleeps at Darnley's house the night before he's murdered. Is that by way does that point to her already knowing she's pregnant and wanting to be able to, um, suggest that the baby is her husband's? Um, so and Leslie dismisses the idea that she would actually have had sexual intercourse with Darnley on that night because he's already received treatment, remember, for syphilis, or known as the pox, at that point in the January. So the likelihood is that she could claim it, but she wasn't going to have physically done the act. Um, so, and she also points out that there's a small window of time. Uh, and if you know anything about the female cycle, I won't go into it here, but there's a very short period within every month that a woman can actually um, get pregnant. Um, and there's this 10-day period when Mary is at Dunbar. Quite a bit of the time, Bothwell is actually not even there. And so the insinuation, I suppose, here is that they were actually sleeping together on an irregular basis before the supposed abduction. um, and to add further to this, that it's uh, this has come from an obstetrician and gynecologist. His opinion uh, on this, and he states that miscarriage could be identified perhaps as early as 8 weeks, remembering sorry, and pretty easily at 10 to 12 weeks if examined closely. And that's why we have to think, who was there that would know what they were looking at or not, the state of the light in the room, uh, and what equipment or that lack of equipment they would have to be able to do it. Twins at 12 weeks, if closely examined, twins could certainly be identified at 12 weeks if closely examined, but does need to have a sensible and weathered eye to distinguish, not something that just you or I would be able to work out. So she talks about if the twins were Bothwell's and were conceived before the 24th of April, the date of the abduction, yes, the date of the abduction, um, then uh, then twins might very plausibly have been identified. After that point, after the abduction, it starts to become so early in a pregnancy that it would be very unlikely to be able to be identified as twins. And it is clearly reported that she miscarries twins. And she concludes with, it doesn't prove that Mary was implicated in the death of her husband, Darnley, but she thinks that it's undoubted that she had passion for Bothwell, and the possibilities were, in this article, do give a damning impression. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix as well, which is interesting. So I will finish off by letting you know what is happening tonight. And I want to give again a shout out to Isaac, my son, for doing the research for me today. Thank you so much. Really helpful. Really helpful. Not to be doing everything on my own. It's great. And he enjoyed it. So that's good. I finally got him into the history that I like. So, like I say, next week though, and the week after, I won't be here. I am on holiday. I am going somewhere rather historic. So if you're in my Patreon, maybe not while I'm away, if I'm being good, if I'm managing to not get on my phone, but I will be sharing some of the things that I see with you. Tonight, though, I am back at 8:15 on History After Dark's channel. We are talking about, well, it's the next person in our History Heroes series, and it's Sir Thomas More. So Sir Thomas More is our hero for tonight on History After Dark. Lindsay says, would I do another Mary Queen of Scots and Elizabeth I tour? We did do a really, really fun Mary and Elizabeth tour. So don't see why not, Lindsay. Would you come? Lindsay was with me this year. It's so great. Um, yeah, I would like to do one. Uh, the Unfortunately, there's one place that if you've been on tour with me before and come to Tutbury Castle, then you are in the very fortunate few, because Tutbury Castle has actually now closed for the public. But anyway, we could definitely do a really good tour on that, Lindsay, to answer your question. Um, so I will wrap up there. If you are around tonight, then join me and the girls, Dr. Kat and Catherine, to talk about Sir Thomas More. Otherwise, I will see you in 3 weeks' time. If you're, like I say, if you're a member of my Patreon, though, I will be in touch with you before that. I'll be asking for questions for Professor Alice. Excuse me. I will be asking for questions for Professor Alice Hunt about the Republican decade, 11 years, slightly more than a decade. And we have book club on the 7th. And I will probably be sharing some photographs of where I'm going. It's very exciting. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I will see you in a few weeks' time, if not tonight. Take care, and check out some of the interviews that have gone live in the meantime. All right. Have a great day, everyone. Bye bye.